What is the Buffalo Bills plan at cornerback? Plus, the team adds wide receiver Laviska Shenault. We're breaking that down for you today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome in. Got some things to cover today. We'll start with what the Bills' plan is at cornerback. I'll share some ideas there and even some ideas I don't like, but we got to talk about them. Plus, the Bills signed wide receiver Laviska Shenault. We'll talk all about that. And then I want to close with some thoughts on listening to the introductory press conferences of Joey Bosa, Darrick Forrest, and Josh Palmer. But we start with what I think most people are talking about, what most people are wondering and curious about, and that's what is the plan at cornerback, because the Bills have added to the wide receiver room, they've added to the defensive line, but corner stands out as a big hole. And let me start this conversation by saying that it is the middle of March. Training camp's not until the end of July, and the Bills won't be playing games until September. So it's okay that everything on this roster isn't what we want it to be right now. There's plenty of time. The idea is not to have the roster ready to play a game tomorrow, but in September. So let's let this thing play out. The Bills will not go into the season with the cornerback room as is. So let's acknowledge that. Now that we've acknowledged that, let's move on and talk about what this team could do. Because it's Christian Benford, and then I guess Jamarcus Ingram would be the other starter right now. Taron Johnson's an inside player. And then in terms of your futures contracts, it's Corey Couch, who's a slot player, and Daquan Hardy, who actually played pretty well on the outside in camp in preseason, but I think he's ideally more of an inside player. None of those guys can be looked at as your answer opposite of Christian Benford. And, of course, Christian Benford entering the last year of his contract. I think it's probably only a matter of time before you're going to get a podcast from me breaking down a Christian Benford contract extension that pays him between $20 and $25 million a season, and I'll be excited to break that down for you. But he needs a running mate. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that that contract is coming. Right, the Bills are going to have a big, healthy commitment to CB1 in Christian Benford. And I think that affects the plan. I'm guessing the Bills would have loved to have signed Paulson Adebo or Charvarius Ward, or DJ Reed or whatever player that was available in free agency, but probably as part of that thought process, it was the Benford contract. And, are you really going to have a $30 to $40 million pair of starting corners? It's something to think about. And so I want to talk through some of the free agent options. I've kind of had some comments on these, but I want to expand on that and talk about some trade ideas as well at corner. Now, I do think that the draft is going to be probably where the long-term answer comes. And this is a good draft for corners. And I'm really going to crank up my evaluations on corners starting pretty much right now. I've been kind of getting myself familiar with the top of this draft class. When I say the top of the draft class, I mean like the first 50 players. And I plan on now kind of expanding into some more depth. But I spent a lot of that time initially watching defensive linemen. And, I only have so much time. So I was wanting to let free agency play out a little bit and then really kind of focus in on where I need to utilize my time the rest of the way. And, well, it's going to be cornerback. Now, we'll talk about a lot of prospects at a lot of positions, and I'll probably ultimately evaluate 100 to 150 players. I'm no longer full-time in the draft space doing 300 guys every year, and we can talk, for an hour about a 7th-round player. If the Bills draft them in the 7th round, we will talk about them. But, my focus right now on draft is kind of top 3-round players. Time is a limited resource, folks. I can't do every player. And, obviously I've spent a lot of time studying free agents and NFL players. And so we will crank up the draft work and talk a lot about corners next week. But I'm guessing there's going to be every bit of 10 players that I have graded with a top 2-round grade in this draft. That's a good thing, right? Because I think the Bills should be in the market. And whether that's at pick 30, 56, or 60, or obviously the Bills have an opportunity to trade up. And so I don't think there's any corner that's really off the table. Travis Hunter's off the table. He's going to go in the top 3 picks. But every other one I think is in play for Buffalo. If they're in love with Will Johnson, they could trade up into the 10 to 15 range and probably draft him. So we're going to talk about all of the possibilities. But I want to focus this discussion on the NFL players that the Bills can bring in. Let's start with Asante Samuel Jr. That's the big name. That's going to be the big ticket guy that's left. And obviously, Asante Samuel only played in 4 games this past year, had a shoulder injury that forced him to miss the rest of the season. But the previous 2 seasons was really good. I mean, in terms of the ball production, the man coverage ability, those things were what you kind of thought they would be with him coming out of Florida State. Now, there's some knocks here on Asante Samuel, plenty of them, right? He's smaller corner that has this shoulder injury that I think is concerning teams, right? A smaller corner that has never been a good tackler or run support player that now has a shoulder problem. Like, that's a lot to consider. Combined with, he's not really been a scheme-diverse player, right? So I think there's some concerns there. Now, he's the upside play. He's the guy that can give you the takeaways, but he's probably going to be expensive, and you have to layer together all those other dynamics. I think the league is pretty cautious with him right now. But a young player coming out of his rookie deal that's had big moments, he's the big name. How about Rasul Douglas? You guys know this guy, right? And obviously we went into this offseason with my opinion being that the Bills should move on from Rasul Douglas. I mean, the Bills' pass defense was bottom 10 last year. Third down defense was atrocious. And I thought you saw some age on Rasul Douglas in coverage. And I'm still concerned about that. But at least you know the floor of the position with a guy that's been around. And I think if you bring in a guy like Rasul Douglas, or really any of the players I'm about to talk about, I think you do that with the hopes that this player that you invest in early in the draft beats him out, and that's your starter. But if not, you have this player that gives you a certain floor. And so I think as things have played out, all right, I'm kind of like, sure, Rasul Douglas for another year doesn't sound that bad. Just like with the Joey Bosa conversation where the options kind of went away, but the need didn't. And it's like, okay, yeah, maybe now this is the point where it makes sense to bring in a Joey Bosa. I feel that way about Rasul Douglas. And I'll even layer Dane Jackson into that conversation where I don't want Dane Jackson to be a starter for the Bills. But as the third corner that gives you a floor that, hey, you make this big draft pick early on that can at least keep the seat warm, that can at least give you somewhat of a trusted option to go, yeah, sure, that's fine with me. And if you don't want it to be Dane Jackson because you've already had the Dane Jackson experience, I'll give you another name, Rock Ya-Sin. It's like the same thing, but he has a different name, and that'll probably make you feel better if you're out on Dane Jackson just because he's played on the team before. Rock Ya-Sin's kind of been a similar career arc. Yeah, he's 28 years old. I think Rock Ya-Sin has that same type of idea. He tackles, right? He's a physical player. Hasn't really become a trusted starter, but has played a decent amount of football and held his head above water. I'm really interested in Shaq Griffin. I feel like this has been a player that's overlooked for a long time. He starts his career in Seattle, does well, turns it into a big contract in Jacksonville. 2 years in Jacksonville, and then he goes to Minnesota. I thought he had a good year. I think he continues to have good years, but for some reason he's kind of dangling around. He tackles, he's physical, he's got good size, he's athletic. I think he's under 30 years old. So Shaq Griffin's very appealing for me. I keep talking about Ahkello Witherspoon because I feel like every single year Ahkello Witherspoon saves some team secondary. He did it with the Rams last year. He's done it for the Steelers. He's done it for the 49ers. Like, go ahead and get him in the building. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. Get Ahkello Witherspoon in the building, penciled in. You hope some rookie beats him out. But if they can't, at least you have Ahkello Witherspoon. So that's kind of where I'm at. Rasul Douglas, Shaquille Griffin, Ahkello Witherspoon, Rock Ya-Sin, Dane Jackson. Those are the names that make the most sense to me. Now, there's trade opportunities, and I don't necessarily love these, but I want to at least talk about it. There's Jair Alexander with the Green Bay Packers, who's got 2 more seasons before he turns 30. And I think there's been a point in time where you'd consider Jair Alexander potentially be the best corner in the league. The problem is he's been hurt. Only played 7 games last year, 7 games in 23, 4 games in 21. 16 in 2022. Missed a lot of football. He's only played 14 games over the last 2 years. Not great. And the other thing about Jair Alexander is he's kind of a goofy guy. I don't really look at Jair Alexander and get the warm fuzzies about his fit with this locker room. But an A-plus talent if he's healthy. Are we at that point? I'd probably let the draft play. If I were trading for Jair Alexander, I would push that after the draft. And then there's the Browns. The Browns have this corner trio of Denzel Ward, Greg Newsome, and Martin Emerson. And my concern with trading with the Browns is that the Browns are not being honest with themselves. They hosted Russell Wilson for a visit. Like, they just paid Myles Garrett and opted not to trade him. Do they really think it's going to happen? They have a pretty talented roster, but too many holes and not enough resources to fix them, and the holes are glaring. Will they make a trade? The name would be Greg Newsome, who's playing on the 5th-year option. That's kind of the problem, though, for the Bills. You trade for Greg Newsome on the 5th-year option. He comes in with a hard $13.3 million cap hit this year, and you'd have to commit to the extension. If you're going to trade for Greg Newsome, you got to kind of commit to that extension. Well, you're about to pay Christian Benford. Are you really going to have 2 highly paid corners? I'm guessing Greg Newsome is going to command probably north of $15 million a season. Like, in a vacuum, very attractive option. I'd love to have Greg Newsome. But the money part kind of complicates that because you're committing to that hard 5th-year option of $13.3 million. And if you're not, then you're extending him, and now you're locking yourself into probably a very expensive pair of corners where that CB2 spot ideally is an economic place for you based on the distribution of funds on your roster and where you can kind of, quote unquote, go with a more, I don't hate to say cheap player, but, a less expensive player. So that's what I think about the Bills corner situation and what's going to happen here. But it's probably a veteran that's not going to break the bank, that gives you a floor and then a high draft pick. And I can understand the concern that the Bills are going into this draft pigeonholed potentially to draft a corner. And there's the cautionary tale of Kyer Elam. And when you go into a draft with a need, that could happen. Sure, there's a lot of corners, though, in this draft. And the Bills can trade up. That's the thing. The Bills are picking 30, but they've got the fuel to trade up. And so I think between that and the options, I think the Bills will be okay to get somebody. I'm not panicking about going into this draft pretty much telling the world that you need a corner. All right, so that's the corner conversation. Coming up next, we're talking about Laviska Shenault and, of course, the vibes from these press conferences. I thought Joey Bosa was fascinating. We'll talk about that here on the other side of it. Be sure to stick with me. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much money I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. I love the all-in-one convenience. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. And it's easy to collaborate. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. It's easy to pick your favorites, folks. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. Plus, you can stay in the action. With tournament games happening almost every single day, there's always something exciting to bet on. Plus, it's easy and fast. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. So the Bills added wide receiver Laviska Shenault. Let's talk about this. A one-year deal. We don't have the terms of the deal, but I'm pretty sure it's a one-year minimum contract. Laviska is 26 years old, 6'1", 224 pounds, RAS score of a 6.97, was the number 42 pick in 2020 by the Jaguars out of Colorado. This dude was an exciting, electric, dynamic college football player, right? I mean, he was really fun to watch and, was really hyped up as this maybe even like a bigger Deebo Samuel type player. And it really just hasn't happened yet for him. And I don't know that it will. It certainly hasn't trended in the right direction. He doesn't have any punt return experience, but he does have some kick return experience. Has 27 career kick returns for an average of 26.2 yards and a touchdown. Injuries have been a problem for him, hamstring and ankle injuries galore throughout his career. So 2 years in Jacksonville, then he was traded to Carolina, spent 2 years in Carolina, and then this past year he was on the Chargers and the Seahawks. And he had two pretty decent seasons to start his career. I mean, 600 yards year one, 619 yards year two, 100 targets in year two. Then in 2022, 272 yards. In 2023, 60 yards. And then last year, 36 yards. So we're not trending in the right direction. We've been on 5 teams already. It's not looking like it's going to happen for Laviska Shenault. So his next chance is to come to Buffalo. Now, once upon a time, I loved Laviska Shenault. Everybody loved Laviska Shenault. He was that kind of player in college. But he hasn't really become a thing in the NFL. He's made a few big plays. But, I mean, there's a reason this guy's bouncing around and the Bills are signing him for like a minimum contract right now. I think the interesting part of this conversation is the kick return piece, because there's some rumblings that the touchback for kickoffs will be moved from the 30 to the 35. And maybe that will get more returns. I mean, the Bills, or the NFL in general, they switched the kickoff rule, and I think they got a few more returns, but maybe not the boost they were hoping for, because teams didn't really want to mess with it and said, you know what, here, have the ball at the 30. Well, does the 35 change things? Probably a little bit. There's probably some more kick returns. And, Brandon Condrington does a good job as a punt returner, but it felt like the team was giving more of the kick return opportunities later on to like Ty Johnson and Ray Davis. I think Brandon Condrington is fully capable of the kick return piece, but that's really, really where my mind goes for the intent here with Shenault, is can he make an impact as a kick returner if they move the ball to the 35 for touchbacks and there's more opportunities. If not, I think this is probably going to be like a Chase Claypool 2.0 situation. And he'll be fun to monitor throughout OTAs and camp, and I'm sure he'll have this moment of glow up, and everyone's going to be like, it's going to happen. Shenault's going to be the guy. Wake me up when it really does happen. So my expectations here are low. He's interesting. We'll file it under the category of interesting. We'll keep tabs on it, but I'd be pretty surprised if he ultimately makes this roster. All right, let's spend the rest of our time here just quickly reflecting on these press conferences. The Bills had Joey Bosa, Josh Palmer, and Darrick Forrest signed their deals officially, and they met with the media on Thursday afternoon. And I watch all the press conferences, so I want to kind of share some thoughts on these. Start with Joey Bosa, and I strongly encourage you to go watch this one. Like I said, I watch a lot of press conferences. Most of them are boring, and nobody really gives you anything interesting. I would say that's not the case with this Bosa presser, where I thought he was really honest, really insightful, came across as very self-aware, wasn't afraid to talk about the injuries over the last few years, and just an understanding of that, plus where he's at in his career, age-wise, and his opportunity to win the Super Bowl in Buffalo. Talked about him being healthy now and how last season he really played at about a 60 to 70% level. But then, by the end of the season, he was feeling more like himself and said it. He even said, like, I played really well at the end of the season. And I agree with that. I thought his best game last year was the playoff game against Houston. I thought he was terrific in that game. He understands the situation, right? Like where he's at in his career, what the Bills need. And, I thought it was interesting how he talked about how he was in LA for so long. And, this is kind of his first opportunity to really play for a contender. He's been on the same team, but it hasn't been stable. He gets drafted. Mike McCoy's the head coach. He's fired after one season. Then they bring in Anthony Lynn, and that doesn't go well outside of that one season. Then Brandon Staley, that was like a joke for 3 years. And then Jim Harbaugh. So a lot of turnover despite being on the same team, and like they even moved cities, right? Like during his tenure in LA/San Diego. Talked about how he's excited for something new, and he doesn't really have a lot of connections to the team, and so it's a good opportunity for him to kind of come in and kind of reestablish himself in a way. I think when you're always around the same people, it's hard for you to really change and evolve. And, it feels like a very fresh start for him, which I think is a good thing. Came across as really confident as well. I thought that was very notable. And I know that the common denominator in all the highest performing athletes across any sport is they are very confident. You have got to be confident. And Bosa came across that way. Talked about, last year when he was healthy, that he's like, nobody could block me. I was playing at a high level. He's talking about, how the Chiefs are really good. He's like, but I'm a really good pass rusher. And I love the confidence that he really let come out in that session. He got me excited. Of course, the big quote coming out was about how Josh Allen texted him and said, if we do what we set out to do, we can be immortalized in this town. Go listen to the Bosa presser. I think you'll get fired up. Josh Palmer. So he said we can call him Josh Palmer. Whatever rolls off the tongue, he said, but when you write his name, you'd like it to be Joshua. So keep that in mind. He kind of gave me an Amari Cooper vibe in terms of the personality. A little more bubbly, a little more, charismatic than Amari, but not the over-the-top personality that you get from a lot of wide receivers. And even in that press conference, you could tell that the Bills are drilling into these skill players to be, you got to be unselfish. And I feel like that's probably something that's pretty comfortable for Palmer based on his career to this point. Kind of came across as one of those cerebral pros. And I enjoyed listening to him talk about how he prides himself in route running the full route tree. Called himself a receiver, not necessarily like, is he the X, the Y, the Z? He's like, I just play receiver. So I thought he came across as like charismatic, confident, but not like loud. These receivers, you know what I'm talking about. These guys are kind of different, right? Palmer feels like a lot more like what you hear Khalil Shakir talk, just kind of a pro's pro, not real loud or over the top in any way. And Darrick Forrest called himself a high-flying turnover creator and a problem solver. I spent yesterday in the tape on Darrick Forrest, watching that 2022 season. I'm excited. He can ball. I put together my film breakdown for the Substack, and I had a good time with that one. I've done all the additions to this point in the Substack. You can see like about a 15-minute clip of me breaking down different plays, doing, you can see the all 22, and then I have like voiceover commentary talking through stuff. I'd love for you to check it out. Herd Mentality Substack. There's a link in today's show notes. And make sure you watch the Darrick Forrest one, because I really showcased a lot of what he can do. I mean, playing from one high alignments, man-to-man in the slot, split zones, low safety. I mean, really good feel for angles, really good feel for like defending deep zones, urgent player. I'm a little excited here. I'm not going to lie. And the more I watched him, the more I thought, I think he can be the high safety paired with Cole Bishop as a low safety. I know this team likes Taylor Rapp, but I think Darrick Forrest is going to make it hard. I think Darrick Forrest is going to make it hard to not take him serious as a contender to really get some playing time on this team. And so I'm thinking he might be Sean McDermott's next gem uncovered at safety. I liked him at Cincinnati. I liked what I watched in 2022. So check out the Herd Mentality Substack. There's a link in today's show notes. You can watch these film breakdowns and get a bunch of extra content from me. Plus, you get into our Discord channel, and we're having a lot of fun. Over 1,600 Bills fans in there talking Bills. I do a live Herd hangout every Wednesday night. And, I go live on video. People ask questions, and we talk about all kinds of stuff. Would love for you to be part of that as well. So you go to the Substack, you get into our Discord. So check that all out. There's a link in today's show notes. All right, folks, that's it for now. We'll see what Brandon Beane does next. And whatever he does, we'll talk about it. And, of course, got a lot to talk about that's not signings. We got to kind of reset this roster. Got a guest lined up for next week. We got to get Herd Mentality in. We got to start talking about the draft. So plenty of conversations to come here on Locked On Bills. We're daily all year long. So be part of it. Don't miss anything. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. If you like the podcast, tell someone about it. Tell someone to go check out Locked On Bills. Share it on your social media. That means the world to me. Like if you retweet my podcast or you share it, so thankful for that. That would be awesome if you could do that. And you know how we go. Go Bills. We'll catch up with you again real soon.